Welcome to Ask a Property Manager, episode number 104. It's tax time again. Who do you owe tax paperwork to as a property owner, and do you owe anyone any paperwork at all? Stick around to the end of this video. We're going to show you how to get all of your tax forms absolutely free. Stay tuned. It's tax time again. We all know that no one loves taxes. I think that that's pretty much a universal truth in today's day and age. Taxes as a property owner can be very, very complicated. When you're just getting started, there's going to be that temptation to do it all yourself to save the money, or do it all yourself so that you learn how to do the tax accounting and the paperwork so that you understand how it all works. I'm going to start this video off by reminding you that I'm not an accountant, that I always recommend that you work with financial professionals whenever necessary. Tax rules are very, very, very complicated, and they change every single year. There's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years as a result of the pandemic, and now more than ever, I recommend working with someone, a competent financial professional, when it comes to working on your taxes. All of that said, if you're the DIY type and if you want to tackle this, this is something that you can do if you feel comfortable in jumping into the tax side of things. And if that's you, this is the video for you. So let's go ahead and get down to brass tacks here. Before we jump into 1099 forms, I want to talk briefly about the W-9 form, and I'm going to pull one of those up on the page here. This is the form that you should have every vendor fill out prior to starting any work at your property or receiving any funds from you. This is also a good time to get their insurance paperwork. That's a topic for another video, and yes, we will be covering that in another video sometime in the near future. The reason that you want to get this W-9 form up front is that you now have the social security number or the tax ID for whatever vendor you're using, so that they can't duck you come tax season and try to avoid paying the taxes on the money that they received from you as, part of their tax obligation. So it's always best practice to get your W-9 on the front end so that you don't have to worry about trying to get it on the back end, especially if maybe you have a job that goes very, very poorly with a contractor. You don't want to interact with them anymore. To turn around and go back and try to get a W-9 at the end of the job, not the best move. The best practice here, get your W-9 on the front end, make sure that you have your W-9s prior to the start of any work at the property, and that way when it comes to tax time, you already have your paperwork in line so that you can issue that 1099. Get that W-9 form up front, you'll be glad that you did. So a 1099 form is essentially a document stating that you paid a non-employee entity, whether it be a person or a business, a certain amount of money during a particular tax year. And I know that that's a mouthful, but we'll break it down a little bit here. There are a few different types of 1099 forms, but for this video, we're going to be discussing the 1099 NEC form, and we're also briefly going to touch on the 1096 form. So who do you need to issue these 1099 NEC forms to? The 1099 NEC form is a non-employee compensation form. Go ahead and pop one up on the screen here so you can take a look at it. And this form is used for vendors such as contractors who have come onto your property and done work. Any vendor that you pay over $600 to in a tax year should be issued one of these 1099 NEC forms. If you have a vendor if you have a vendor purchase the labor and the materials, or purchase the materials and supply the labor, sorry, mush-mouthing here a little bit today. If you have a vendor supply the materials and the labor, when you issue that 1099 NEC form, you're going to issue it for the entire amount, the labor and the materials. And at that point, it's on the vendor to have receipts on the back end from Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever supply houses they're using to deduct their costs. But you're issuing that 1099, you're going to issue that 1099 in the entire amount. If you paid a vendor strictly for materials, you don't need to issue a 1099 NEC. So my example here would be if you go and buy a doorknob from Jim Jones Locksmith and they just supply the doorknob but they don't do the installation, that's a supply house at that point for you, and you don't have to issue them a 1099. On the flip side of that coin, if they came out and installed that doorknob for you, now they're a vendor and you may need to issue that 1099 NEC form in the event that you pay them more than $600 in a calendar year. If the entity that you paid is a corporation, whether it be an S corporation, a C corporation, or an LLC as defined on their W-9, and I'll pull that back up real quick just so you can see that there are check boxes there under the business name, they'll tell you what their corporate structure is when they fill out that paperwork. But what I was saying there is that if you are paying a corporate entity, you do not have to issue a 1099 NEC form to them. Corporate entities are responsible for their own accounting practices and knowing how much money they received and things of that nature. So you don't have to issue those 1099s if someone is a corporation, either an S Corp, a C Corp, or an LLC. There are a couple of interesting exceptions to the NEC rule. If you paid for legal services, for instance, regardless of if the attorney you used is a corporation or not, if it's a sole proprietor or if it's a corporation, you must issue that 1099 NEC form. So that's one of the exceptions that's out there. It's an interesting exception. It's one that I personally just learned about a couple years ago. But yes, if you do any work with an attorney over the amount of $600, you have to issue that attorney an NEC form, regardless of whether or not they're a corporation. So if they're a sole proprietor or a corporation, you're still going to issue that form. Last but not least, I want to briefly talk about the 1096 form. Go ahead and pop one of those up on the screen for you to take a look at. The 1096 form is basically the cover sheet that you'll use when you mail your copies of the 1099 NEC forms to the IRS. This way the IRS knows what forms you're submitting, how many forms you're submitting, the total amount that you're reporting on your 1099 forms, etc. And you can see that there's different checkboxes there that you would check off depending on the form that you're submitting. If you're submitting different types of forms, I believe you have to submit different 1096s for each submittal. So if you have MISC forms and NEC forms, for instance, you would have to run 2 separate 1096 submittals. The deadline is quickly approaching for getting this paperwork out the door, just so you have a heads up. If you need to issue 1099 NEC forms, those need to be in the mail by no later than January 31st. And you also have to send a copy of that 1096 NEC form that 1099 NEC form along with your 1096 transmittal. Those need to be mailed to the IRS no later than February 28th. So really, if you have to issue those 1099 NEC forms, you really have just a few days from the time that this video goes live to the time when that paperwork needs to be out the door and in the mail. Last but not least, I do want to go ahead and show you how to go ahead and grab your tax forms for free from now on. I've been doing this for a couple years now. You can go right to the IRS website and click on Forms and Instructions. Over here on the left sidebar, click on Order Forms and Publications. Then click on Online Ordering for Information Returns and Employer Returns. Finally, you can scroll down here. You can order forms for tax year 2021 or tax year 2022. And basically every tax form that you could possibly need is on here. For instance, here's your 1096 form. Here is your, let's scroll down to the 1099 forms. Here's a 1099 NEC form. They also give you instructions on how to fill out these forms. You can request instructions on how to fill out these NEC forms, this, that, and the other thing. Any tax form that you're looking for, you can get on the IRS website for free. They will ship these to you via USPS. I know we're kind of close to the deadline here right now as far as the 1099 forms go, but this is a cheap, free alternative to running to Office Max, Office Depot, wherever, and buying a package of forms for $25, $35, $55. If you have the time to get the forms from the IRS directly, you can get them for free. It's a nice way to save a little bit of money if you are attempting to do this on your own. That pretty much wraps things up. Thank you all so much for watching. I truly do appreciate it. If you learned something today, do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. If you have a friend that could get some value out of this, do us a favor and share it with them. Questions or comments, drop them below. We'll talk to you soon.